All right, here we go.
These are 8 screenplay tips that novelists could really learn from and would radically help their stories. Hi, I'm John Matthew Fox, and I help authors through editing and courses. Let's get started with number 1,
Principle of antagonism. I'll have to find some good isekais on Moral Road. Hell yeah. The best thing to do is look at the competition and see how you can beat them. Is John Matthew Fox a pseudonym? I don't know, Levi. It's a bit too ideal. I don't know. And I doubt you would want your real name out there if you're a professor like that, right? It just makes sense for it to be a pen name. Read so I know how to write like them. Exactly. No, that's what I mean, Callie. Like you either like you read the competition so you know how to do it better than them, right? Like, you look at it and you go... Like, that's half the time I look at things and I... Like, when I saw the reading and writing category, I was like... After what... Like, because I spent, like, a month or so just, like, looking at streams and doing stuff on top of watching Asmon for, like, what I wanted to do. And when I started looking at the reading and writing section, I was like, you guys are fucking retarded. I can do this way better than them. They're not entertaining. They're not really even fucking streamers. I want to be an actual streamer. I don't just want to be a writer. I want to be a full-on streamer. I want to be entertaining. I want to be all over the place. I want to have multiple pieces of content. I want to just, you know, do interactive stuff. So, looking at the competition, I'm like, I can blow these guys out of the water. And that doesn't really say much because there's only, like, 3 people in the category that get more than, like, 30 viewers. But there's one German guy who gets like 700 viewers. I don't know what I want yet. I'm pretty chaotic about it. But I don't know. Yeah. It is what it is, Callie. I'm all over the fucking place with everything.
Principle of antagonism. This one's from Robert McKee, who wrote the book Story, which is kind of like the Bible of screenwriting. And this principle just said that your protagonist must face an escalating series of more difficult opponents. And he says that bad stories are ones without an escalation, where every single opposing force is on the same level throughout the whole book. And for an example of this, look at Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. There are 5 levels of opposing forces. The first one is Dudley and the Dursleys. Okay, this is pretty mundane level bullying and neglect. I mean, it's bad, yeah, but it's not the worst thing imaginable. Then the story escalates up to Malfoy and Snape. Okay, these are magical antagonists with a lot of physical power and a lot of social power, and definitely a step up in terms of the opponent. The third level of opposing forces is the troll in the dungeon. So now we get to the stage of life-threatening physical danger. The fourth level will be Fluffy and the enchanted objects. Now we're mixing both magic and deathly force. And then the fifth level, as you might guess, is Voldemort. Always be escalating those opponents that your protagonist was forced to face. Also, remember that opposing forces don't only have to be beings, they can also be something like the weather or something very internal, like the protagonist's sense of self-doubt. This next screenwriting tip is one that I build out as a book editor, probably hundreds of times. It is number 2, in late, out.
Yeah. In late, out early. Only show what is necessary. Cut all boring. I don't know if boring is the right word to say. Cut all. Oh, I have something planned for Nell and Belfry versus Stella, Angela, and Gawain. Ooh, that sounds epic, Callie. Fuck. I swallowed and breathed at the same time, guys. I think I might have the hiccups now. Only show what is necessary, cut all. I'm just gonna say, only show what's necessary, cut the rest.
Early. This is scene advice, and it says that when you're writing a scene, you want to start that scene as late as possible, wait as long as you can, and then start right there. And then when you end the scene, end as early as you possibly can. So what does this do for you? It makes sure that your scenes aren't these bloated, overweight things with lots of extra before and after, but makes them really tight and really punchy, and only gives us the most entertaining part of your story. This advice came from David Mamet, who wrote movies like The Untouchables and Heist. But for example, we're actually going to
That's kind of like a comparison here is like the idea of the stream versus the YouTube videos. Like, the stream has everything in it, but then the YouTube videos are very concise to like whether I'm doing a story, whether I'm playing a video game, whether I'm doing a react, or I'm doing commentary, or I'm doing some sort of like makeup or a collab or something like that, right? So it's like you can get narrowed down to what you want, whereas the stream is just kind of all over the place.
At a scene in The Dark Knight. This is a scene where the Joker is trying to recruit members to their organization, and he snaps a pool cue in half and then says, all right guys, there's only one spot, you're gonna have to fight for it. And in the screenplay, look at where the scene ends. The men stare at each other, then stare at the jagged pool cue. Now a lesser writer would include the fight, because they think like, fights are entertaining.
Yes.
Why wouldn't I want to show that to the audience? But we don't need that part of the scene, because the point of the scene was to show who the Joker is as a character.
Yeah, not
to
show the
guess
fight.
What's going to happen? Oh, one of them's going to win, and he's going to be able to join the organization. That is just a great example of what it looks like to get out early in a scene. And hey, Bookfox Academy has over 250 videos to help you with the journey of writing your story. Make sure to check out the hundreds of testimonials on my website. And hey, come join the Bookfox clan. This next tip comes from a legend in the...
He did say clan. He said clan last time too, guys. I think it was just a bad word choice. The Bookfox clan. I mean, it sounds good, but you know, it's just a taboo word. It just sucks, right?
Screenwriting industry, and it is number 3, structure your turn.
All right, structure your turning points.
Turning points. So the legendary Sid Field pioneered this concept in his book, Screenplay, The Foundations of Screenwriting, where he talked a lot about the 3-act structure and how that creates these 3 really pivotal points inside the narrative where you have to make sure something happens at those points or else it's going...
Act 1, leading up to the fall of Garuda. Act 2, exile of the adventurers and the 100-year quest, the finding of Atomus and the confrontation of Fafnir. And then the 3rd act is learning about the past, confronting the monarch. That's book 1
for the reader. Now, what are these specific points? It's at 25% of the way through your book, 50% of the way through your book, and 75% of the way through your book. And as writers, what you should do is look at these specific points in your book and ask yourself, like, what's the big event? What's the big turning point at that section of my story? And if you don't have one, you should ask yourself, why not? And to see this in action, let's look at the movie The Silence of the Lambs. The Act 1 plot point, which is about 25% of the way through the book, is Clarice meets Hannibal Lecter. So the direction of the story fundamentally changes. Then we have the big midpoint shift at 50% of the way through the story, where we learn that, oh, Buffalo Bill is someone who skins his victims alive. And then Act 2 plot point, which is 75% of the way through the story, we see Hannibal Lecter escape, which leaves Clarice on her own to solve the case. Now, you can use this as a way to map out your story before you write it, but you can also use it as a revision tool to see, like, how is my pacing working? Does the pace of my storyline keep big things happening at these key points? Absolutely love this next point. It is essential for all writers, and it is number 4,
multi-purpose scenes. Single-purpose scenes, why would you include them? You want your scenes to be packed full of layers and purpose and meaning. If it doesn't have that, what's the point of the scene being there?
Multi-purpose scenes. This one comes from John Truby, who wrote the book The Anatomy of Story. And his basic principle is, look, scenes shouldn't...
Like, for instance, like the first scene in Chiral Clones. The entire point of the scene is to set up that Linda is a spy. Set up that she is a chemist and biologist. set up her personality and understanding that she's kind of like not exactly your normal fit for like what you would expect of a scientist. So that's where it's like the idea of her being a spy kind of clashes with her being a scientist, and the fact that she doesn't even have an idea of where to begin. Like, she just doesn't understand what the results she's getting mean. And I'm sure there's a couple of other things that the scene does as well.
Only be doing one thing. If they are, they're a failure. You need to have your scenes doing multiple things at once. And I gotta really agree with Truby on this. This is something that I frequently mention as an editor, is I see a scene doing one thing and doing it really well, but then there's another scene right next to it, and it's also doing one thing and doing it well. And I think, how can these scenes be combined so that multiple things are happening inside a single scene? If you have a bunch of single purpose scenes, what does that do? It bloats the book. It just makes it less interesting to read. Now, for an example of how to do this well, let's look at Lord of the Rings, the Council of Elrond. Look at all the different things that are happening in the scene. One, we have exposition. We're learning about the ring's history. Two, we have character development. We get to see every single character's perspective on what should be done with the ring. Three, we have plot advancement. So, you know, they're forming the Fellowship, which is the foundation for the rest of the story. Four, we have some thematic exploration. We learn that power corrupts everyone, even those who are extremely powerful already. And fifth, we have some great conflicts set up. We see elves versus dwarves with Legolas and Gimli. We see Boromir versus Aragorn, ring as a weapon versus destroying the ring. So go ahead and pick a scene from your book and interrogate it. Is it accomplishing more than one thing? How many levels is it working on? How is it forwarding the story and establishing character and working on theme? Now this next point is very clever. It is number 5, write characters smarter than you are. The person who came up with this was Brian Koppelman, and he is a writer of shows
I actually do. I feel like I do this.
Rounders, and Ocean's 13. And he points out, and I do think he's right about this, is that beginning writers tend to write characters who are dumber than they are. And most of the time, if you're not going for humor, dumb characters are simply not as exciting as smart characters. On the other hand, Koppelman points out that when he's working with pro writers,
Levi, it's not a low bar. It's literally like, you know, South Park, like James Cameron raising the bar. It's like you literally have to go into the Marianas Trench to like see the bar. It's so fucking low.
they almost always write characters who are smarter than they are. So let's look at some of Koppelman's films to see whether he follows his own advice. Okay, in Rounders, yeah, Matt Damon is kind of a genius at reading other people and knowing how to play poker. And yes, Ocean's 13 features a lot of incredibly smart characters as well, who simulate earthquakes and have faux reviewers and fake FBI agents. It's brilliant. And then in Billions, I always remember that scene where he's analyzing people and events to figure out how to make stock trades that will earn him hundreds.
Okay, so I had an idea for a bag that gives you anything you want if your charisma is high enough, like a house or food. So I could call it the easiest coaxed bag of accommodations, or the bag that says yes if you're pretty enough. I like both of them, honestly, Callie, but maybe the first one, easily coaxed bag of accommodations. But if you're going for humor, bag says yes if you're pretty enough, might fit it.
Of millions of dollars. So yes, your goal, especially with your protagonists, is to try to write them in a way where they come off as even smarter than you. This next tip comes from Aaron Sorkin. And of course, you know I can't make a screenplay writing video without mentioning him. So here it is, number 6, 3 things in a pile. So
3 things in a pile. You're a pile.
Aaron Sorkin wrote movies like Social Network and Moneyball and Steve Jobs. And we're going to look at that last one for an example of three things in a pile. Now, three things in a pile just means that inside of a scene, you try to have three things happening at once. It could be three perspectives, it could be three levels of personality, and it's even better if these three things are conflicting in some way. So in this scene with Steve Jobs, we see three things happening simultaneously. One, Steve Jobs is being a jerk, which, if you've seen the movie, is kind of the whole point of the movie. Two, we see Andy Hertzfeld defend Steve and say, oh, no, Steve's not being a jerk right here. And then we see Chris Ann Brennan say, no, Steve is definitely being a jerk. So in storytelling, repetition can be bad, but if you repeat with little variances, like in this scene where everybody has a different perspective and you're commenting on Steve Jobs' jerkiness, then it actually becomes very entertaining. So in your scenes, especially if you have, say, three characters in your scene, work on having multiple perspectives clashing with each other. Now, this next insight is a three-part principle. It is number 7, home, work, play.
I'm gonna pick both. Have one of the more sarcastic demon girls be like, maybe you should ask the all-powerful bag that says yes if you're pretty enough. That's smart, Callie. That's super smart. Home, work, play, principle.
So you might know Blake Snyder, maybe not by the movies he's written, but certainly from the book he's written called Save the Cat. And this homework play principle addresses the problem of how do you introduce a character well before you have the inciting incident which really starts the story. And Blake Snyder says that you want to show your protagonist on 3 different realms: the home realm, the work realm, and the play realm. If you can pull that off and do so quickly enough, then the reader's gonna feel enough attachment to this protagonist to want to go on the journey with them. And for an example of this, check out Russell Crowe in the very first Gladiator. First, we see his home life. His beautiful wife is waiting for him. Next, we see him at work, being a very important Roman general. And third, we see him at play at the after party of his troops' victory. So once you've set up that introduction to the character, now it's time to have the inciting incident that starts the story and gets the character on their journey. Okay, I have saved the best for last. And now it's time for the final screenwriting tip that we're gonna learn, and it is number 8. Make your climax into an inciting incident.
All right. Make your climax into an inciting incident.
So I actually don't know who came up with this particular advice. It was sort of an apocryphal piece of advice that I heard ricocheting around the writosphere. Now, the idea behind this principle is that a lot of stories tend to start too late. So one thing that you can do to solve that, if you're struggling with your story, is you take what you think is your climax, what you want to work up with, and start the story with that. That's actually the beginning of your story, not what you want to lead up to. And then figure out how to tell the story from that point onward. So if you do know what screenwriting guru is responsible for this advice, please leave that name in there.
I feel like some of my beginnings are where I prefer to put my inciting incidents. Yeah, I always have the inciting incident at the beginning. Like, within the first, if not within the first paragraph, within like the first 5 paragraphs is usually the inciting incident. But, I mean, I definitely see looking at things from different perspectives. And, like, for instance, like, what would the story look like if instead of starting where I start, where Husai finds the Com Pearl, maybe we start the story at the fight of Garuda. And they're on the walls, and they're just bantering and talking about how ridiculous it would be for the Beastmen to ever try to attack. And then the entire city basically gets wiped out. And then boom, everything falls apart from there. The adventurers get exiled. It's like, yeah, you could start there, but then I see, like, well, like we were discussing the other day about, like, the build-up to Zayd's death and everything like that. Like, there's so much that you almost lose by starting the story there. But the other thing is starting the story somewhere else before the Com Pearl So it's like, that's the one thing that I'm like set in my ways with certain things, where I'm like, I feel like this is how it, if it was going to exist, this is how it would exist. It just kind of falls into its own place, and it feels like this is the beginning of the story, you know? It's like, this is the important part. And as long as I think I feel that way, I think we're at a point where analysis for changing the point of the story will never actually change it, because it's in the perfect spot already. But you never know.
Comment section. Now, for an example of this, let's look at Saving Private Ryan. Now, the death of three brothers in war, in a lot of ways that could feel like a climax, but in Saving Private Ryan, instead, that is made into the inciting incident. Oh, the three brothers have died, therefore we need to go save the fourth brothers so this mother doesn't lose all four sons.
Shalom, hey Smokey.
Now, you can use this advice in a very different way. You can also tell your story non-chronologically, so you're actually starting with your climax and using it as the inciting incident, and then going back from there and telling all the backstory that leads up to that climax. That's a very different way.
That's kind of what we're doing, but we're doing it in almost a reverse way, where the climax of the Calm Pearl and the 100-Year Quest happened 50 years ago, but the very first scene and the first inciting part of the book is the monarch killing Torg. So when you see Torg again, you're like, oh, it's that character that died. Right? And it gives you that insight into it. It's like, oh my god, okay, well this is later on. If this is a recording of that... Wait, it talks. I made a video. After this, could we see it? Yes, Callie. Absolutely. Post it in the Discord.
To approach this advice, but I think both those approaches work. An example of this would be, say, Fight Club, where it starts with the gun in his mouth and the building's ready to collapse, and then we backtrack from there and tell all of the story that leads up to that point. Now, you might have watched this whole video and be like, John, you're really gung-ho on screenwriting and how they can help novelists. Well, maybe you should watch my counterpoint to this video, which is called Don't Let Movies Sabotage Your Writing. And this video is all about the ways that novelists should resist screenplay writing techniques, because there's a lot of things that only novelists can do. Check out Bookfox Academy if you have.
True. Alright guys, another video for Bookfox. Give him a like, give him a view, give him a subscription. You know, head on over there, support his channel. He is quite an amazing author, editor, and